I'm overwhelmed by the attendance here, and I hope you realize this isn't church, so it doesn't count towards your Sunday obligations. Thank you, Dr. De Gregorio, for the kind invitation, and certainly to be here with friends and esteemed colleagues. It's a wonderful treat. I remember the last time I was here at U of M Dearborn to talk about something of this caliber. It was about the movie The Passion of the Christ. And similarly, given the tensions that had arisen regarding the movie, and except the only difference is this time I didn't go chronologically where Muslims usually go, which is last out of the three monotheistic faiths. And so we heard from the Jewish representative, we heard from the Christian representative, and then of course I had to say, well, look, we weren't there. But there is some salience from the Islamic perspective when it comes to Jesus, and in many ways, the figure of Jesus in Islam is between deification and deicide. Muslims reject both of these narratives, that they neither consider him to be divine, nor do they consider him to have been the victim or the target of a form of deicide. Regarding the historical Jesus, and I know as the reference was made earlier to the book Zealot by Reza Aslan, and Reza is a friend, and I know that the book is problematic. We're going to try to deviate from looking at that, if you'll pardon the expression, canonically. When it comes to Islam, this notion of scholarly archaeology, if you will, or examining the historical bona fides of Jesus is something that is essentially not done. It is not really a question from within the Islamic narrative of trying to prove whether Jesus existed or not. In fact, that is already resolved within the Islamic narrative. He did exist. Within the way that Muslims perceive Jesus, and the way Jesus is known to them from within the Islamic narrative, it's fascinating to see the construction of the holy book of Islam, the Quran, which is the source then of how one comes to Jesus, so to speak, for Muslims. The Quran is not a chronological narrative. In fact, for anyone who has tried to read the Quran, one realizes that it tends to have its own coherence, it has its own strategy, it has its own logic within it. It's not a Hegelian book. It doesn't have this sort of positivistic and chronological format. But what it also then demonstrates is that the people of polytheistic Arabia were familiar with the stories of the Old and the New Testament. Because unlike the Bible, which sets up in a literary device the figures that are presented and represented in the Bible, the Quran doesn't have to do this. The Quran, in fact, in speaking in the verses that refer to Jesus and the family of Jesus, refer to him referentially, presuming that the people of the Arabian Peninsula already have some level of cultural literacy of the stories of the Bible, which is a fascinating literary device that we find. So there isn't, therefore, the need to set up an awful lot of the construction of who Jesus was and going into a lot of the biographical details. It's a wonderful way of then presenting Jesus to Muslims, but of course the opportunity cost of that is that a lot of the historical establishment that one finds in the Bible is not presented in that sense. What we do know in the Quran is the genealogy of Jesus going back at least 2 generations. The Quran has at least 2 chapters or surahs that are devoted to the family of Jesus. One is a chapter referred to as Surah Maryam, an entire chapter, one out of the 114 in the Quran that are named for Mary. And in fact, Mary has the very exalted position within Islam and within the Quran itself of being the most frequently cited woman in the Quran, more so than any other woman, including the Prophet's wife Khadija or the Prophet's daughter Fatima, or anybody else for that matter. What we do know in the Quran is the genealogy of Jesus, known as Isa, being the son of Maryam, Mary. And in fact, in the Quran, this is exactly the way that Jesus is referred. Isa, son of Maryam. And we find that his grandparents are also mentioned in another surah entitled Imran, which is named after his grandfather, the family of Imran i.e. the family of Mary herself. So we find out that Imran, known biblically as Amram, is married to Hannah, who for Byzantine experts will know as Saint Anne, and that their ancestor is Fakud. Now Fakud has another child named Ishba, who is married to Zachariah, whose progeny is Yahya, or John the Baptist. So we find then that the family tree is established right off the bat when it comes to the cousin relationship between Jesus and John the Baptist, and this is then confirmed within the Quran. This idea then of how Jesus is presented to Muslims by reference provides both the context and the continuity of how within Islam Jesus is one of a series of prophets dating all the way back to Adam himself, the original son of man, and then continuing through, including such names which would be familiar to those scholars and students of the Bible, including Noah, including Abraham, Isaac, Ishmael, Jacob, Joseph, Moses, some prophets that are not named in the Bible, and then also including from the New Testament, Jesus and John the Baptist, both of whom are considered to be great prophets within the religion. And the level of respect that is conferred upon Jesus in Muslim discourse is the same as how it is to Muhammad. The idea that all of the prophets are conferred with the appellation, peace and blessings be upon him. So we find then that there is a parity and a fraternity, if you will, of prophets within the Islamic condition. Also, we find that there are stories which are affirmed within the Quran regarding the biography of Jesus. First of all, dealing with the virgin birth itself. For Muslims, the virgin birth of Jesus is at the same time remarkable and unremarkable. And let me explain to you the contradiction in terms. It is remarkable because, after all, a virgin birth, by definition, it tends to be remarkable. But at the same time, among prophets, it is not considered to be remarkable because, after all, Adam himself was born in a remarkable way. So one of the distinctions that is made between Islam and Christianity regarding whether the virgin birth of Jesus is dispositive of his divinity in any way is therefore refuted from an Islamic logical construction of saying, well, since Adam also was not born of a unremarkable birth, therefore, and he wasn't divine, then therefore that claim could not be made about Jesus. He is a prophet, according to the Quran, who is imbued with the Holy Spirit. So I suppose from an Islamic perspective, if I were talking to a Christian audience, 2 out of 3 ain't bad. Regarding the notion of the Messiah, when it comes to Islam, there is the acknowledgement that Jesus is coming back. It is not Muhammad. And I'll explain it and delve into it a little bit more deeply in a minute about this historical division of comparing Jesus and Muhammad and what have been the repercussions of that between the two faiths. According to Islam, at the end times, when things get bad, or some of you who are pessimistic will say get worse, we'll find then that Jesus will return and will be partnered with the Mahdi, who in Islamic terminology is somebody who will also help to bring about and usher in an era of peace and prosperity on earth. Now, how does Jesus come back is a question that, of course, also then implies that we have to figure out where did he go. And Islamically speaking, there is the acknowledgement of the crucifixion as a historical event. The issue, though, in Islam is that Jesus himself was not crucified. And in the Quran, it says that they say, and you have to love the generic they, because it's a term that we also like to use. They say that Jesus was crucified. They say we killed Jesus. You say to them that they did not. And this is God speaking in the Quran. Tell them that they did not. According to Islamic belief, Jesus was raised into occultation because he would not suffer such an ignoble death as would be that on the cross. And he is currently in occultation and will therefore return at the end times. Upon the vanquishment of evil, according to Islamic tradition, Jesus will then usher in a period of peace, and will then die a mortal death as every human must. According to Islamic tradition, he will be buried next to the Prophet Muhammad and the Prophet's companions at the mosque in Medina, and in fact there is one empty grave that is, by tradition, left empty. We find that when it comes to the message of Jesus, this is something that was not contradicted by Muhammad. The message of Christianity, however, was something which was contradicted and was refuted both by Muhammad and by the Quran, insofar as the claim of Jesus' divinity. And we find, if you read the book Allah, a Christian Response by Yale Divinity School scholar Miroslav Volf, a lot of the same issues and a lot of the same misperceptions regarding the divinity of Christ and the Trinity within Christianity are issues that are not just ones that vex Muslims, but also that vex Christians throughout history. So it's fascinating to see how these are both inner as well as external dialogues and debates that have been going on throughout history. So why then so much of the animus throughout the centuries between Islam and Christianity over the figure, the persona, and the essence of Jesus? Well, first of all, I would contend it has a lot to do with patenting. Jesus has been patented by Christianity, particularly when it comes to the issue of divinity. And unfortunately, also, Muhammad has been patented by Muslims, quite contrary to the idea that both of these historical figures were meant to be very universalistic in their reach. But a lot of it also has to do with the political dimensions which began with the earliest encounters of Islam and Christianity. After all, only 3 years after the Prophet's death in 635, Muslim armies from the Arabian Peninsula leave the peninsula and capture Damascus.